I did not have a desire to be a screenwriter. That was not part of the plan. From the time I was about 13, I wanted to be in the theater. And I went to drama classes in high school and junior high, and then majored in drama at San Francisco State University, and then went on to the Goodman Institute in Chicago. It was all toward being a director, really. And then I found that directing didn't have enough control for me. And so I began to explore writing and began to produce my own plays in college and found that it was a really good fit. When I was at the Goodman Institute, I was faced with a big decision. They wanted me to direct there. I was on a full scholarship, and I had to choose not to write. They wouldn't let me write. I had to direct only. And it was at that time, 1963, when the assassination of JFK took place. And I found that I could not stay in higher education at that time. I had to get out and start to write about things. And so I left there, and I went to Mexico, and I wrote my first full-length play in Mexico. And then by the time I came back to California, I was very much a committed writer, and ended up getting married, and I was about to have my beautiful son, Peter, and I went to the playwrights unit at UCLA and got a job, classic job, parking cars in Hollywood. And while at UCLA, I wrote a play that won an award in the Samuel Goldwyn competition. And as a result of that, it was written up in Variety and Hollywood Reporter and all of that, and suddenly I had agents approaching me. And I didn't even have a telephone. And one agent came out and left a note under my door in Venice, California, and he was such a persistent, wonderful guy, his name was Lee Rosenberg, that I signed on with him. And he got me involved with film directors. And so then I was sort of through the back door into screenwriting. But playwriting has always remained my big love, and I'm back at it again now.
When I think about playwriting, I mean, it feels like such a romantic notion, like a very pure form of writing. And I'm curious, is that what drew you to that form of writing in particular, the purity of it? The moment I knew I wanted to be in the theater was when I was in a Christmas pageant in junior high school. And I was backstage, and I looked out, and I saw the audience, and I said, this is such a ritual. This audience, dressed in funny clothes, are all sitting down in these uncomfortable seats to experience something that's not real. And it's like being in church. And I thought, if I could be part of that, that would really be a wonderful vocation. I didn't use those words, but that's the feeling I had. And that's always the feeling I've had. There's something about the theater. Film can get there. It truly can get there. When you see, I think, Citizen Kane or 2001: A Space Odyssey, you are drawn into a ritual. But theater is designed to be that, and it's designed to be a one-on-one with the audience. I mean, you can walk right down as Hamlet does and talk straight to them if you want to, if the playwright wants you to. And your themes are expressed by human behavior, not by plot points. I think David Mamet described the difference between the two as being film feeding you information as opposed to playwriting feeding you behavior. That's probably a bad paraphrase, but that was generally what he was saying. And I think that's true. Film is an exciting medium, but for me, the beginning of it was playwriting because I was so interested in touching the audience directly. Yeah.
And amazingly enough, I never wanted to be a film director because that seems so far removed from the audience. I know it isn't. And I know when Scorsese looks through a lens, he's looking exactly the way he wants the audience to see it. But it always felt removed from me as a writer. And I never got as comfortable with screenwriting as I
when Scarecrow came to you, was it an idea that you had specifically for the screen, or had it been percolating before that? Or?
Well, when I was in that period that I was talking about, when I was still finding myself, I did a lot of hitchhiking, and I hitchhiked from California to Pennsylvania to do a summer stock period. And while I was on the road, I met the guy who became my prototype for Max. We were at a crossroads, and he stood in front of me without seeing that I had been there first. And he had a cardboard suitcase, and he was obviously just a really down guy. But I wasn't going to just lose my place in line, so I hemmed, and pointed out to him that I got there first. And he said, "Well, do you have to go east?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm going to Pennsylvania." And he said, "Cool, that's fine." And he walked across the road and headed north and put out his thumb. And I was at that time taking notes because I was writing plays. And I jotted him down as a really wonderful character to keep my eye on. And later, after I had done my first assignment as a screenwriter, after I'd been signed on to my agency, and I was now starting to think in terms of film because it was being kind of insisted upon me by my agency, think film, that character reemerged. And I started to devise a story around that beginning, literally around that encounter, which made it pretty much intact into the final film, as you know. And then it was just a question of finding the other character, and that was pretty easily done as well.
So was it a question of, when you're thinking of a character to pair up with Max, finding someone obviously with some opposite attributes? I mean, Max is a very abrasive person, but Lion, on the other hand, is very soft-hearted and almost vulnerable in a way.
Absolutely. Well, Lion is hiding a big secret. He's running away from himself. And Max is running toward the new self that he wants to be. And the theme of Scarecrow really is about a very, very hard man who becomes softened through friendship, but stronger in a different way, so that when his new friend falls, he is able to pick him up and help him. And it's really that essence. So what I wanted in Lion is I wanted a character who expressed a gentle approach to life, but was not a weak character, was not, somebody who wasn't going to be interesting to the audience. And I have been, during my college years, working with a wonderful comic named Al Singolani, and we had worked a lot together, both in college and then in a cabaret. And he had a very, very physical sense of humor, and very funny guy. And I spoke to him, and I talked to him about this, and I developed Lion along the lines of, one, my thematic needs, which was his approach to making crows laugh rather than scaring them, and Al's particular shtick, which was very visual, and it was very hard to write it. But we did. As a matter of fact, Al got a part in the movie and went on to get an agent, but he obviously couldn't play the lead because that was going to be Al Pacino. Mm-hmm. So the two characters were then in place, and then it was a question of finding the mutual dream, and of course the terrible secret that Lion was running away from. And for that, I delved back into my own childhood, which was being raised in the Roman Catholic Church, and found the demon that would be lurking in him there.
Another strength of the piece for me is its portrait of America at that time. Max is someone that might be somewhat embittered by his experiences, but Pacino was still kind of wide-eyed and hopeful. And I think those 2 points of view, or 2 points of view that you can use to look at America in that period of time as well. Am I reading too much?
Well, certainly you're going to look at America when you have two people hitchhiking on the road. I wasn't out to do what Kerouac did. This was an interior journey. And Max has been a 3-time loser. He has come out of prison knowing he cannot go back. He must change his ways. He must listen to his sister, who's been for years banging on his head, saying, Max, give it up. We're not kids fighting for our lives anymore. You don't have to do that. And Lion panicked and walked away from a wife and an unborn child, which is a very hard thing to do. He just ran scared. And he is now, yes, he's wide-eyed, but he's wide-eyed in the way that people are wide-eyed when they're afraid of the dark. And I think that that's an important, and certainly Al Pacino understood that and played that very subtly and very well. That his fear, which finally comes and grabs him by the throat, is always there motivating him. He is not just a sprite from Midsummer Night's Dream. He is a frightened young man who is going to go back and face his biggest fear, which is exactly what Max is doing. And that's why they need each other, because they're both limping toward Bethlehem, kind of. They've got to find their strength, and they find it with each other. And it's such a perfect find that when Max has to, he turns over his hard-earned savings to try to save his friend.
Yeah.
And I've always been, by the way, amazed when I see blurbs of Scarecrow calling them two, charming losers, because it seems to me that they are far from losers when they achieve what they achieve interior to themselves, when their spirits transcend the fear that they have lived with for so long through each other. I would not call that a losing experience at all. I never have. I don't now.
Tell me how the theme of the Scarecrow started to play into that. How did that manifest itself?
I can't answer that question. It was in the writing. I can remember where I was, and I can remember how hot a summer day it was, and I had them getting ready to go to bed, and Lion was jabbering away, and it just somehow came to me that he would have this idea about standing out in a field and being a clown and making the crows laugh, and therefore, important point, the crows would spare the field, not because they were afraid of him, but because he made them laugh, and they went on and bothered somebody else. And that summed up for me his defense mechanism, his whole raison d'etre about getting from point A to point B without getting hurt. And that he would pass that on to Max, who immediately says, that's the craziest idea I've ever heard. But later on says, that's a pretty damn good idea. And I'm going to try to live by it. And he actually does live by it when he does his striptease. So the answer is, it was in a moment of writing, and I didn't prepare for it. The characters were starting to speak by that time, which is wonderful when that finally takes place.
There is, no matter how long you do it, I would imagine, and you've been doing it a long time writing, there is this beautiful sense of mystery to it, that when it takes over, it feels like it comes from a different place and you're channeling it.
That's exactly so. If you are sure of your theme, and that's the hardest part, is becoming very sure of what it is you want to say. So you're not just trying to say, well, I got to be funny, or I've got to be suspenseful, or we got to have a car crash because it's getting a little, soft here. Finding out what it is that's at the heart of what you want to say, then finding the characters who will help convey that, and then letting them develop slowly. I swear, writing has got to be one of the slowest processes ever,
maybe learning to play the violin, which I also did when I was a kid, is harder, but not much. You've got to go very, very slowly, and you've got to do your scales every day, and you cannot rush it, or it will become technical.
When you finished the screenplay, what was it? United Artists were the first studios to have an interest in it, correct?
Yes, they bought it.
Okay. Did they have any demands from it or changes, or did they purchase it as it was?
They purchased it as it was and then decided immediately not to make it, which is, classic Hollywood.
Yes.
They put it, I guess, what's called turnaround, or turnabout. I forget. Yeah, turnaround, and it languished for a year or year and a half, and I went on to other things, and then through what process I'm not sure. It may have been an actor friend of mine named Anthony Zerbe. It may have been Lee Rosenberg. I'm not sure. Somebody got it to Al Pacino, and he was just flat out immediately enamored of the script and of that character. And he said, I want to do this. And he had just had The Godfather released, so he had the ability to make things happen. And based on that, Warner Brothers bought the script from United Artists, and they went forward with it.
I idolize Al Pacino. He's kind of my creative idol. He has been since I was a kid, and I was born the year Scarecrow came out, and I look at his performance in Scarecrow, which is remarkable. And then the very next year, he played kind of the opposite of that with Godfather 2, with the blackened eyes. Did you spend time with Pacino? Did you discuss the role and the script with him?
I did. It was a very strange situation. He was obviously a very hot star now, and he was being protected by everybody. But he wanted to talk with me, and so I met with him a few times, once over lunch and then once in his hotel room. And then, you'll love this story, I think. He and Gene Hackman decided they had to experience some reality to this. So they actually got on the road together, dressed up as Max and Lion, and hitchhiked from Bakersfield to San Francisco. And they, they were, well, who's going to be recognized? And they both were recognized at different times. Hackman was very famous for The French Connection at the same time that Pacino was very famous for The Godfather. But anyway, at one point, I was at home and I was having a poker party. And I'm playing poker and the phone rings, and I answer the phone, and hello. He goes, Garry, it's Al. Al, Pacino. Yeah. Where are you? Oh, we're in San Francisco. And Gene's taking a nap. You know how Max, he has to take a nap. So Gene's taking a nap. And I have this idea, and he had this idea about Lion. And he was very enthusiastic about it, and I said, well, that's a fairly good idea, but I don't think it works because it plugs plugs Lion into the present too much. He wanted to carry a radio next to his ear, and he was listening to the radio all the time. I said, the thing about Lion is that he comes from a time bubble. He's not connected to anything. And that's why it's able to come up and ambush him the way it does. And he went, God, that's right. That is so right. Forget I asked. So we hung up the phone, and I went back to the table, and my friend says, who the hell was that? And I said, oh, it's just Al Pacino. I raise you $5.
Well, that's beautiful, and that also shows. I mean, this is the Pacino we know today as well. Obviously, someone that came from the theater and who has remained with the theater,
absolutely,
whose big kick out of what he does is the journey, is the discovery, is the nonstop investigation. I think.
Yeah, he is a brilliant actor. He's wonderful on the stage. Recently, he was directed by a man who was a friend of mine in college, Dan Sullivan. We both went to San Francisco University together, had the same class, and he directed him in Merchants of Venice, and
and Al has never not worked in the theater. He worked in the theater before his film career. He worked in the theater sporadically during his film career, and he is still working in the theater. And it is, I have such admiration for him. It is really hard to express in a few words.
Well, when Scarecrow was picked up by Warner Brothers and Al Pacino kind of saved it from being in turnaround, eventually Jerry Schatzberg came on as director. And I would imagine there's always kind of give and take between writer-director because it's all a question of interpretation once a director comes on board. How did the two of you meld in that process?
Well, fine. You have to understand that before Jerry came on board, there was another director. And he was assigned first by Warner Brothers. And he brought me into his office and said, what we need is a rewrite. And what we want is a rewrite with a whole different ending, which is going to be blah, 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 blah. And it was, in my view, horrific ending. But I had sold the script, so I had zero input into what they were going to do about it. And so it was decided to take it out of my hands and turn it over to other hands, and I was sent back home. This director then flew to Boston, where Al Pacino was doing Richard III. And he presented him with the fait accompli that he was going to have the script rewritten. And Pacino didn't say anything to him, but when he arrived back in L.A., he had been removed from the project at Al Pacino's insistence. Al then brought in Jerry Schatzberg, who directed him in Panic in Needle Park, and they had a great relationship. And so Jerry was already tuned in to the fact that Al was committed to this script, so that whatever possible conflicts Jerry and I may have had was eschewed by that reality. I didn't have any conflicts with Jerry Schatzberg. And then once again, you have to remember, I didn't have much to do with the production. Writers are not generally welcome on a set, but even if they were, I wouldn't have wanted to be there. It's not my gig. I was on to other things, and I did want to see dailies, and I did see some dailies and all of that. But Jerry Schatzberg was always an extremely efficient and creative guy. He was dealing with the two hottest stars in the business. You can imagine how hard that must be. And he did it, and he got the picture, brought in on time and on budget, and hats off to him. Did the casting of Hackman make sense to you? Because obviously Pacino and Hackman separately are the two greatest actors that cinema's ever known, but together, this is a combustible combo. But was Hackman a great choice, did you think, from the beginning? Oh, I think I fell on the floor when they told me he was going to sign for Max. Honest to God, I thought. I saw him in the Poseidon Adventure. Mm-hmm. And I said, this is a huge star about to happen. I knew it long before, or not long before, but certainly before French Connection. And I just knew when they said he was going to be Max that my troubles were over, that I was going to have my tough Max with a heart that could be found.
Yeah. So when you finally see the finished film, I would imagine you attended a premiere. Was that the first time you saw it in total?
Yes, it was not a premiere. It was an industry screening. Okay. For agents and directors, and at one of the studios at Warner Brothers. And this is a story. I guess this is an anecdote that goes to the heart of what would not happen in a play, for instance. The Warner Brothers had a film with two of the hottest stars, and they wanted to make sure that they could screen it maximum times daily to take advantage of that fact. And therefore, the film was cut to make it a little shorter. And part of the material that ended on that famous cutting room floor was the very material that I had so carefully constructed into the script to show the gradual break in Lion, where he goes from wide-eyed innocent to wide-eyed scared and finally to catatonic. And when they edited out those steps in his deterioration, it became, for a lot of people that I've talked to, a puzzling collapse in his character. And I think it harmed the movie, and I think it harmed Warner Brothers' desire to capitalize on the commercial nature of the starring that they had. And I'm sorry that happened, and it's just about my only complaint about the film. And recently, two actors named Shiloh Fernandez and Noah Segan have done a play adaptation of Scarecrow.
Really?
And they worked with me very closely as they did that, and we reincorporated all those elements of Lion's collapse into the play. So if and when that gets produced, that problem will not be on stage.
I would be intensely interested in seeing that. But as it is now in the film, it's the phone call, which is incredibly intense and heartbreaking between he and the mother of his child, and then it cuts right to the fountain scene where he kind of collapses and becomes catatonic. Isn't that how it plays now? So everything in between.
Oh yes,
there is
no. The collapse of Lion was built into all the areas prior to that phone call. That phone call, which is, I agree, perfectly rendered, is the culmination of a lot of minor steps which have been weakening his legs, so that when he comes out of that booth, his legs go out from under him. That phone call now is being asked to carry the entire weight of Lion's collapse, and it shouldn't be asked to do that. So I just went about my business and said, let's hope for the best. It's a wonderful film. I had no idea it was going to be 4 years later being honored with a special screening in New York and with this interview from you, which is just delightful. But I knew that it was a special piece of work, and I knew that the actors were flawless and wonderful.
Well, it does feel for many people. When I started to get into Pacino in grade school, I would review all of his films, and that's when I found it. So I found it rather early in life. But for a lot of people, it does seem to be one of those under-the-radar gems from that great decade of filmmaking. So are you discovering that more people, as of late, have been discovering it for themselves?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I got a wonderful two emails recently from Great Britain, where the film has just been brought out on CD for the first time, and a lot of people who never saw it at that time, even though it had won the Cannes Festival and therefore had a certain cachet in European theater distribution, it had gone away and it disappeared. And with the release of the CD, they are discovering it. And I've had one critic write me and tell me what a wonderful film he thought it was. And another man and his daughter, a 17-year-old daughter, wrote me to say how the daughter had just flipped over it. And that is so really gratifying, because there you are touching your audience. And that's what got me started on the whole thing to begin with. And there are still small films. Prince Avalanche, for instance. Somebody just sent me a video of an interview that Gordon Green did of his film, where he mentioned the influence of Scarecrow on Prince Avalanche. So there is a small film about two guys, and he's mining that territory in his way, and that's wonderful to hear and to learn, and I can't wait to see it.
I've heard that about Prince Avalanche, but I didn't hear him quote Scarecrow directly, so that is so heartening for me to hear that. And his next movie stars Pacino. So they're
oh, you're kidding.
Yeah, he has a character drama that he's doing next that Pacino's starring in for him.
Oh, good for him. Well, he's one to watch. There's no question about it. And that is super news. I'm glad to hear that, and good luck to them. Yeah, he did an interview with Paul Rudd and Emil Hirsch, and that's when they mentioned the influence of Scarecrow.
Oh, that's terrific to hear. So tell me about theater today. You have a new play that you've just done. Obviously, you still get a kick out of you're still turned on by theater as strongly as you ever were, it sounds like. But where are we with the dramatic play today?
Well, you have regional theater, which is stronger than it has ever been before in this country. It used to be regional theater is where you do stuff that once upon a time played Broadway, and then you're doing the 10th rerun of it. Now regional theater is developing new work, and it's a place that Broadway and other New York venues send out their feelers to look at. La Jolla Playhouse is a perfect example. It's a breeding ground for new material. There in St. Louis, Arizona, Texas, Minnesota, there are regional theaters. We in Southern California here we have South Coast Repertory, which once upon a time did one of my plays. They're developing new material. So you have all kinds of opportunities, and when you get to New York, you then have to be very careful because the rents for any theaters in New York are sky high, which means you have to charge a lot for your tickets, which means you're running the risk of playing, commercial material only, and it's a risk, but it's negotiable. Right now, Broadway's negotiating it by having stars in absolutely everything that they do. That can be okay, and it can be not so okay. But off-Broadway, the Atlantic Theater Company is a splendid example of off-Broadway theater, and it does huge work and often moves their stuff straight to Broadway. So I have an agency there called Summit Entertainment, and they're representing my play, which is called The Girl Who Was the Sun, and we're going to be looking for the best venues to move it along. But it's one of those plays that I've worked on for 10 years, and it's fresher than ever in my mind. It's feeling better all the time, and it's very close to being done. I hope to have it finished by the end of October.